The movie starts with a young man thinking, we are never very far from those we hate, and that's why we can never be truly close to those we love. As he sails to a remote South Atlantic island to work as a meteorologist, these thoughts haunt him. Captain Axel approaches, lights a cigarette, and tells him they are almost there. In September 1914, they finally reach the island, but no one is there to meet them. The young man has come to replace another meteorologist, but there is no sign of anyone. Captain Axel goes with him to find the previous meteorologist and make sure he's safe. They find a lighthouse and knock. The young man forces the door open and discovers Gruner, the signal technician, who is the only other person on the island. When Captain Axel asks about the previous meteorologist, Gruner says he died from typhus. Gruner seems indifferent and walks around naked. Annoyed, Captain Axel and the young man leave the lighthouse. When Captain Axel bids him goodbye, the man wanders around the island, knowing that like the previous weather official, he must monitor the intensity and direction of the winds for 12 months before someone replaces him. When he returns to the cabin to fix his things, he finds the previous meteorologist's diary revealing his name as Alder. Inside he sees sketches, a photograph of Alder's wife, and even a drawing of a lighthouse with strange creatures beside it. The next morning he finds strange rock circles on the sand. He then heads near the coast with a telescope to start work. As he peeks through the binoculars, he sees the naked man stretching in preparation for a long day of doing nothing. That night, while reading, he hears rustling outside his door, which he initially thinks is Gruner. However, the noises get louder with scratching and growling. Suddenly, a reptilian hand appears at the bottom of the door, which he immediately steps on. When he hears more, he hides under the floorboards as they try to enter his cabin. They attack his place, but notice that there's no one inside. When the footsteps stop, he looks through a small hole in the floorboard's door. The creature peeps through as well, causing him to poke its eye with a knife. Feeling afraid, he locks himself underground for the whole night. He calls Gruner the next day, pleading to be led into the lighthouse, but Gruner refuses. Determined to fight, he heads back to his cabin and spends the whole day reinforcing it with a newfound rifle. Night falls, and a swarm of beasts starts appearing from the darkness, slowly approaching the cabin. He braces himself as he shoots them one by one. Eventually, he has no choice but to start a fire since there are too many to handle. The fire makes them flee, but it burns the cabin. He runs away from his burning house. Fortunately, it rains before the cabin completely burns down. The following day, he sees Gruner leave the lighthouse and discreetly follows him down to the rocks. When he is about to ambush Gruner, a blue female sea creature attacks him. He points his gun at her, but Gruner stops him from shooting by showing that she is vulnerable. The young man takes advantage of the situation, offering Gruner some of his supplies in return for shelter. Gruner then calls the man a friend for the sea creature to acknowledge him as one. A little while later, they head into the friend's cabin to gather his supplies. However, Gruner tells him that they need to head back to the lighthouse since it's nearing sunset and the creatures might attack. One morning, the friend is awakened by the female sea creature licking his hand trying to heal his burns. It turns out that he's been asleep for 2 days. The friend then finds Gruner and takes an inventory of their ammunition. He explains to Gruner that the creature, which he calls a toad, is like a dog that will not abandon her master, no matter how cruel he is. The friend gazes at her, fascinated by her existence. However, Gruner warns him not to trust her entirely. Gruner then shows the friend more of the lighthouse and takes him up to the top. The friend wonders why Gruner chose to stay on the island when he had the opportunity to leave. When the friend arrived, Gruner tells him that he will never return to the civilized world now that he is a master of his own destiny. Later that day, the friend contemplates how a few days of isolation have recently changed him. As he fixes his things, he's surprised by the creature's presence but still observes her as she ignorantly eats a candle. As he's trying to explain to her the use of a candle, Gruner calls him up, commanding him to bring his rifle. That night, Fred watches Gruner as he prepares for the attack. The older man instructs him what to do and fires the flare gun, signaling the beginning of a long night. On the other hand, while the female creature wails into the sky, a crowd of sea creatures barrels towards them. Gruner starts shooting, but the friend feels overwhelmed as he remains in his position and slowly walks backward until he passes out. Gruner is left alone fighting the appalling swarm of sea monsters. The following day, Gruner is enraged at the friend's ineffectiveness, telling him to fetch water instead. The friend gets the water, and when he comes back he hears pounding and wailing in Gruner's room. To his surprise, he sees Gruner thrusting himself into the sea creature. Later that day, Gruner and the friend eat lunch in awkward silence. However, Gruner breaks the tension by banging the table, telling the friend that he only has one last chance left. That night, Gruner attracts the creatures with the flare gun. When the monsters appear, the friend is frightened again, causing Gruner to lock him outside on the balcony, leaving him to fend for himself against the monsters. As the sun rises, Gruner is surprised to see the friend alive, covered in blood, gazing blankly at him. Months pass and the two men fall into a routine. The creatures attack several nights in a row. They manage to coexist, with the friend's everyday task being to fetch water while Gruner maintains their weapon. One day, the friend speculates that the creatures are returning to the lighthouse to reclaim the female sea creature. However, he still wonders why she allows her species to be killed and why they don't attack on some nights. Gruner doesn't care about why the creatures come and plans to exterminate them all. Later on, the friend visits his old faded cabin to reclaim some of his belongings and discovers how he has changed. As he looks at himself in a mirror, he trims his beard, hoping to regain some sense of his old self. On his way back to the lighthouse, he comes across a massive whale skeleton and picks up a piece. Still, there are no attacks that night. While the friend wanders around, he sees the creature and approaches her for the first time. As he touches her cold skin, he grows to like the strange being and names her Anaris. One evening, Gruner invites the friend to play chess. As they play, the young man shares his observations and hypotheses about the existence of the sea creatures. However, Gruner asks him to shut his mouth and play, urging the friend to perform a checkmate. Gruner then picks up his gun and points it towards the young man's direction. It turns out that the sea monsters are already on the attack. They fight with their rifles but are overwhelmed as the attack comes too suddenly. They decide to go up to the lantern pane where the light illuminates. Unfortunately, Gruner is badly bitten on the foot as he flees upstairs. After locking himself inside the pane, they spend the night up there while the creatures try to reach them through the glass partition. Thinking this is his end, Gruner sings a tragic love song until the sun rises and the monsters leave. That morning, Anaris takes care of Gruner's wound, sticking her tongue into the wound. Later that day, the friend perceives a ship from the distance. While he roams, he immediately runs inside to get the flare gun. Afraid of being left alone to fight, Gruner restrains the friend as he's about to shoot, pinning him to the ground. Anaris tries to protect the friend, which enrages Gruner, causing him to walk out with the flare gun. Feeling frustrated, the friend yells at Gruner, expressing his fear of being left behind and fighting alone. A little while later, the friend finds a way to communicate with Anaris by showing her a boat he carved out of bone. Hoping she would understand, Anaris then leads him to an abandoned rowboat on the shore, away from the lighthouse. At the lighthouse, the young man tells Gruner about the boat, but Gruner says he knows about it. Meanwhile, the friend is interested in diving into the shipwreck with an atmospheric diving suit, but Gruner disapproves, saying that what he's proposing is a suicide mission. One afternoon, the young man paints the rowboat, hoping to make it work. He then hears a howling from the distance and finds Anaris enjoying a swim nearby. As he removes his clothes, he slowly approaches her as if he's going to kiss her. Gruner is watching. Back at the lighthouse, while the friend is reading a book, Gruner hands him a diving suit and changes his mind after witnessing what they did in the pool. They row out to the shipwreck using the boat. The young man explains that a rope tug is their only way to communicate. He then wears an old diving suit, searching for the crates carrying dynamite while Gruner controls the string from the boat. Underwater, the friend finds the container and immediately hooks it up. After hooking up several small boxes, the friend finds an infant sea creature peeking through his suit, causing him to fall. He tugs the rope and starts to panic as more creatures surround him. Gruner is on the verge of abandoning him, but when the young man releases himself from the suit and swims up to the boat, Gruner immediately helps him aboard. When they return home, they check the crate and discover that only one box among the others contains explosives that are dry enough to use. Winter is coming, and the friend and Gruner devise a plan to entice as many creatures as possible into the lighthouse before detonating the dynamite in hopes of scaring them away. However, that night, no one attacks. 3 weeks pass in the blink of an eye, and Gruner is getting impatient while waiting for the big attack. He asks him to go inside and defuse the detonator for a while. One time, while they're waiting for Anaris to bring their lunch, Gruner discovers that she's brought starfish instead of fish. He kicks her, blaming her for telling her kind about their plan to scare them. The angry man grabs the friend's shirt, telling him that their new plan is to leave the door open, luring them inside for an ambush. That night, the friend leaves the door open while watching it. Gruner takes the upper ground, preparing to detonate the dynamite. They've been waiting for hours, and it seems like they're not going to attack. Gruner drags Anaris beside him, forcing her to wail. Meanwhile, a sea creature attacks the friend at the main door. He manages to escape, but more creatures are coming in. The creatures attack, but Gruner cannot detonate the explosives. The friend sprints to the top of the lighthouse and reconnects the detonator. An explosion occurs, killing many sea creatures. When the friend wakes up the following day, he immediately searches for Gruner and wakes him up. The young man is relieved when Gruner starts singing a song which he joins. Meanwhile, there is massive chaos around the beacon. Gruner uses a spear to finish off the wounded and dying toad on the beach. Later that evening, while they watch for the next attack, the friend hears Anorus and several other creatures mourning the loss of their species. Anorus vanishes, but Gruner assures the friend that she will crawl back as she always does. The friend seems to regret what they did. On the other hand, Gruner is still preparing for an explosion to continue scaring away the beasts. That evening, while the friend fixes Gruner's mess while the old man sleeps, he discovers a wedding photo of Gruner with the words, "Love, love, love" written on the back. He recognizes that the woman in the image is the same as the woman in the diary. Realizing that Gruner is the former weather official, and that Gruner isn't entirely devoid of human compassion, the friend does no work except staying alive. He takes out the carved boat and sees a child sea creature approach. Behind the child is Anorus, looking more confident with her group. The friend sees that they want a truce, but Gruner only wants Anorus back, which she refuses. Gruner keeps saying no one leaves as he walks back to the lighthouse. Then he fires a flare at the child, killing him. Anorus looks at the friend with doubt and disappointment and leaves him alone. Gruner continues to shoot at them. The friend chases him, struggles, throws him down, and stabs his leg. Angry, Gruner stands up, attacks with an axe, but the friend calls him by his real name and tells him he's not a murderer. Gruner stops, drops his axe and says love, 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 as if he's becoming himself again. He goes outside and looks at the stars, where the sea creatures kill him. Months later, a ship arrives to bring the friend's replacement. The captain mistakenly calls him Gruner and doesn't correct it. Gruner leaves the friend to take his place. The young man thinks he has found peace. The new Gruner stands on the balcony, watching boats while Anorus swims freely in the sea. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.